So we just celebrated Easter last week, and the date of Easter fluctuates over a few week period of time each year. And so it's either before Easter or after Easter every year that my husband and I remember the anniversary of our daughter's death. She died 18 years ago this past Monday, the day after Easter this year. And since it's been 18 years, it's something that isn't as tender. I can talk about it and not feel as tender. It's something that we've healed a lot from in the last 18 years. But I shared a picture on Monday of a memory of our daughter visiting the Easter Bunny a few weeks before she died. And some kids are a little bit afraid of the Easter Bunny, and they don't want to sit on the Easter Bunny's lap. But our daughter loved it. She kept wanting to go back and sit on the Easter Bunny's lap again and again. And that's a precious memory for us. Our daughter Helena was born with a heart defect. And over the span of her short life, she had 3 different heart surgeries. And it was after the 3rd heart surgery where there were complications, and she died 3 days afterwards. Over time, different things have stood out to my husband and I as we get to this anniversary each year. Our grief now is less sharp. It's less heavy. It's something that we have learned how to carry over the years. And my husband and I have gotten to the point where we can think about that almost 2-year span of time as something precious. That we got to be parents for the first time and learn how to do new parenting things for the first time with our daughter. And she also had more of a fragile immune system and a fragile heart that we had to watch out for. But it was such a joy to learn how to be parents with her. And at the same time, we're also thankful for the life that we've lived into since she's died. It's been 18 years, and sometimes it feels like it was a lifetime ago that she died. And sometimes it feels more recent. But we're so thankful for the things we've learned. We're thankful for the people that have been brought into our lives, people that have ministered to us or have taught us important things. We're thankful for how we've been able to show empathy to others who are going through times of heartbreak. We're thankful for the different paths that life has taken us down. After our daughter's death, my husband changed from being a pastor to pursuing a degree in counseling to becoming a counselor and a professor of counseling. And that was impacted by our experience of loss. So our life looks very different than it may have looked if we were able to raise our daughter. So we can accept the hard things about that now and also the beautiful things. But when we think back to that time when we did lose her, it was a faith-shaking and rocking experience for us. We didn't just feel shaken, we felt knocked down. During this time of grief, it was hard for us to feel like there was anything solid to stand on. We didn't know what we believed anymore. We learned that grief can come in waves, and that grief doesn't take a linear step-by-step process towards healing. We also learned that it was so beautiful and valuable to have people around us and not to go through this alone. It was at that time where we felt the prayers that people prayed for us in such a more powerful way than we'd ever felt it before. And it was beautiful for us to have a church family to share this in, that we were truly not alone. We even relied on the faith of others to get us through that time. It's a scary thing if you're a pastor and you don't know where your faith is, and you don't know if you have faith, and you don't know if or how it will come back. And the strategy that we developed during that time, the shorthand we would say is just fake it till you make it. But what we tried to do is we had a strategy of we would preach things and say things that we had once believed, and we hoped that we would come to believe those things again, or that God would teach us new things. And over time, that did happen. Our faith didn't return to us overnight, but over time, we did start to believe in the power and presence of God again. And God was able to teach us new things. Now, in Paul's letter to the people living in Rome, he says that no matter what suffering people undergo, because of their faith in Jesus, they could stand in a place of grace, even during times of deep suffering. Our new sermon series is called Romans, Dying to Live. And this is, we're going to be digging into this New Testament book for the next 6 weeks. And we're studying Romans because it was written to a group of early Christians who were living in the heart of the Roman Empire. And this book, this letter to them, emphasizes that through Jesus' death and resurrection, that they were set right with God. And because of Jesus and what Jesus had done for them, they could have peace with God and hope for the future. And they could learn that faith doesn't depend on them being strong, but on the power of God. In a commentary I read about Romans, it says this: Paul did not believe in faith. He believed in God and emphasized faith, not because faith is powerful, but because God is. Those words are so comforting to people who do not know what their faith looks like or how strong their own faith is. But to hear that it doesn't depend on them, but it depends on the power of God is so comforting. This is the longest letter that Paul ever wrote in the New Testament. Paul wrote most of the letters in the New Testament, and it's also probably the latest letter that he wrote in his life of being a missionary and a person who was evangelizing and sharing the gospel. So he had time to really think about what is the power of God for him, and how can he share that with others. And so he'd never met the people in Rome that he wrote this letter to, but he wanted to give them guidance for how they could live in the in-between times. That's the time after Jesus' death and resurrection, but before God has come to set all things right. In the in-between times, there was still suffering. There was still uncertainty. This group of early Christians was still a persecuted minority, and they were under threat because they were not worshiping Caesar, they were worshiping God. So he writes to them in how they can try to live their faith even in the in-between times. We also live in between times. The time of already that Jesus has died and has been raised from the dead, but the not yet of God coming to set all things right. We live in this time where we have been brought into a relationship with God, but God's plan has not been fully realized. When we look around, we still see wars. We still see inequality. We still see sickness. We still see suffering. We still see death. So Paul gives the people in Romans a way to deal with and a way to accept the suffering that just happens by living life. And so these words have come to mean a lot to me, but I think they've come to mean a lot to a lot of people over the centuries when they hear about how Paul has us address suffering. Paul does not say that God brings the suffering, but this is what Paul says about suffering. He says we can boast in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not disappoint us because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. So this is Paul's map of how we work our way through suffering. No one likes suffering, but it's often in those times of suffering or heartbreak or uncertainty that we actually learn a lot about ourselves. We gain a kind of endurance by going through things that test us. We gain character. We learn what we value the most when we go through times of suffering. And also when we experience suffering, we learn to be more gentle and tender with other people who might be suffering and going through hard things, because we ourselves know the pain of it. So Paul is never saying God brings the suffering, but it can be a helpful teacher to us. I want you to think about standing on a solid ground made of grace again. This ground is made because of God's movement towards us, God claiming us and forgiving us in Jesus' death. And then Jesus being raised from the dead is what can give us new life. And on that ground we can stand. And we didn't have to do anything to deserve it. It says, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So we have this ground of grace to stand on, no matter what we do or how ready we are to receive it. And when we suffer, the grace of God is still there holding us up, even if we don't feel it ourselves. Christians sometimes think that because of Jesus' resurrection, that all suffering and hard things should be canceled from life, that things should just be honky-dory, especially for Christians. Christians think that sometimes to acknowledge pain and grief and suffering is to doubt Jesus' power, or to think maybe I'm not doing faith right if I am still suffering or experiencing hard things. And we can think that Christians are just not allowed to be sad. We forget that we're still living in the in-between times. Yes, God is present with us, but God has not set all things right yet. Paul tells the Romans and Paul tells us that yes, there still is suffering. There still are hard things. But even when we have been knocked down, the hope that Jesus brings has not been canceled out. The ground of grace never falters, even when we have been knocked down. It is still holding us. God is still holding us. Another way to put this feeling of standing on the solid ground of grace was shared in a song that came out about 15 years ago by Natalie Grant, and it's called Held. And in this song, she shares the story of a mother who lost a child at 2 months old. And the chorus keeps going back to saying the promises of God. It says, this is what it is to be loved, and to know that the promise was, when everything fell, we'd be held. So yes, sometimes things fall apart, and yet the promises of God still hold us. That ground of grace is still something that we can still stand on. And that ground of grace is built by that relationship that we have because of Jesus' death and resurrection. We're going to dig into more of what Paul writes to the Romans in the coming 5 weeks. But what he really wants people to know is that faith in God doesn't depend on our power, but on the power of God.